Hello, Pickled Onion Knight here with another Collect, Emulate, Avoid video. Now, this is the long-awaited PlayStation 2 video. And if you've been following my stuff for a while, you know it's taken me ages and ages to get to this. And it wasn't really a case of what do I leave in. It was a case of what can I get away with leaving out. Because the PlayStation 2 is quite honestly, it was a massive thing. And part of the reason for doing these videos is basically to have a look back and see if, obviously, if it's worth playing today, but also how to get the best use out of it, sort of thing. So for some of these consoles, I have gone into the ins and outs of how playing them on modern televisions and things like that, and that was the sticking point for me on this video. Was what is the PlayStation 2 like in a modern setting, or was originally going to be a big part of this video, to do with hooking it up, video sources and things like that, and how to clean up the image and things like that. But I've decided I'm going to make that a separate video. I'm going to do a follow-on at some point in the future to getting older consoles working with modern televisions. I've already done a small video on that, which I'll put a link to in the description. But I'm going to update that to include things like the PlayStation 2 and the original Xbox and such like, because they're kind of out on their own in the more complicated side of things. So what I've decided to do is put none of that in this video. I may touch on it briefly, but it is going to be very, very brief, because otherwise this video would end up being so long to try and explain things in taking it from a context as it was then into now. And anyway, so I'm going to try my hardest not to go into all that, because it was purely just complicating matters. So I've basically ended up with this is going to be, I've got my notes written out as one page, and that was the aim, to stop this being too complicated and too long. The notes are basically written out as one page, and that is going to be it. So it may not be the most in-depth video on the PlayStation 2, but it's basically going to be the most important things, in my opinion. So, let's start with the name, PlayStation 2. Yeah, it's not the most imaginative name, but at least with that you know what you're going to get. So you know with a PlayStation 2, basically if you like the PlayStation, you're probably going to like the PlayStation 2. There's going to be no real surprises here. It's going to be what you liked a generation ago with more of the same. Very good. It's kind of like Nintendo Entertainment System and Super Nintendo Entertainment System. You like this, you'll like this better. It's more of the same. Which is basically what it is more of the same. Only the 3D by this point had obviously got slightly more than experimental as it was in the previous generation. I've already touched on that in the other videos. So I'm not really going to go into how much better than the PlayStation 2, than the PlayStation 1 the PlayStation 2 is. I'm basically going to go into the facts about this console if you take it as a standalone at this point in time. So let's start with the models you can buy. So you've got the original fat PlayStation 2s, which I would argue is probably the one to go for. They're not the most reliable machines in the world, but they are well built. Put it that way, they're well built. I mean, I wouldn't drop one down a flight of stairs and expect it to still work, but they're built solidly enough that it would survive a fall off a shelf, let's say. If you were a bit too, with the pad, it should be fine. And then you have the slim model, which is flimsier than the first model, but still quite well built. The things that seem to go on these most is the hinges, because it's a flip top rather than a tray loading. And I'll get onto the differences between the models in a minute. And then you've got the Japan-only PSX model. So that's basically the three main models. Now, there are variations in colour and themed consoles and things like that, but basically that's the three models you get. Now, The original fat model has 2 controller ports, it has 2 memory card ports, it has 3 USB ports, two normal size USB 1 ports, and a little mini USB port, or is it a Firewire port? Might be a Firewire, come to think of it. Anyway, it's got ports that nobody ever uses, put it that way. And it takes all the it takes the Sony proprietary outputs on the back. The only thing it really lacks that other consoles started to have by this point is networking support. It doesn't have Ethernet or wireless or anything like that. In fact, none of them had wireless at this point, I don't think. But it doesn't have an Ethernet connection, which is a shame. But there is a way around that. I'll explain it later. Then you have the slim model, which is basically the same, only the power supply has an external transformer, so it might be slightly better at heat dissipation, even though it's tiny. And as I said, the original model has a tray loading mechanism for the discs, and the slim model has is basically a top loader. It's a flip top. Which is why at the time the Slim was one of the most sought after models, because if you were playing copied games or foreign games, it was better to have the Slim version of the console in order to do that, because you didn't have to modify it too much to do it. And then there's the PSX, which when I say PSX, a lot of people think you would mean the PlayStation 1, because a lot of people abbreviated PlayStation 1 to PSX. I'm not talking about the PlayStation 1, I am talking about a Japanese-only model PlayStation 2 that was also a analog DVR hard disk recorder. And if you ever see one of these out in the wild, 9 times out of 10 it is broken. I'll just say that right off the bat now. But this was basically the same as the fat PlayStation 2, only it was originally designed as a DVR box that basically had a PlayStation shoved into it and was branded as the PSX, a PlayStation 2 for the living room. But then, as far as the marketing was concerned with this console, they were all designed for the living room, really, because one of the biggest selling points for the PlayStation 2, and for me, probably one of the major reasons why it ended up as the best-selling console ever devised, was more than likely due to the fact that it was also a DVD player. Now, bearing in mind, when this thing first came out, it was about the same price as a DVD player, certainly about the same price as a Sony DVD player. Now, it wasn't for me. I had a DVD player when the PlayStation 2 came out. I had a DVD player that I bought in 1998 that cost me £150, and it was a cheap Chinese. It was Matsui DVD 110. It was cheap Chinese, really, really clunky, massive thing. So it wasn't really a selling point for me. But for a lot of people it was. A lot of people, a PlayStation 2 was their first DVD player, and people used to have these in their living rooms. A lot of people bought them not really worried about the games. They bought them as a DVD player because the thinking behind it was that I want to buy a DVD player, I'll go to the Sony shop or similar electronic shop, I see the Sony DVD player sitting there at £299. I see the PlayStation 2 sitting there at £299. Well, I'm going to buy the PlayStation 2. It might have been £250. I'm pretty sure it came out in the US at $299. I'm not 100% certain on the original UK price, because as the PlayStation 2 came to market, lots of different stores, it wasn't really price fixed. It was kind of up and down, and you could go to different places, get it 20 quid cheaper, or get a bundle deal and things like that. So it's kind of skewed as to how much it actually cost when it came out, and different websites say different things. I honestly don't know, because I didn't buy one when it came out. I bought it down the road. So I can't tell you that. But the point is, there's no confusion on this matter that it was give or take about the same price as a Sony DVD player at the time, and a lot of people just bought the PlayStation 2 because why wouldn't you? This does DVDs and plays games. I'll buy that. Now, this was a particular issue. I have to say, this was probably the first one of the first consoles that didn't come with what do you call it? Coaxial as standard. So, i.e., like you could tune it in on a television tuner. So you couldn't plug this into an older television. You had to have a television with SCART. Now, it wasn't a problem for me because my television had SCART, but I know plenty of people that bought a PlayStation 2 home and then found that it wouldn't work with a TV in their bedroom. It might work with the newer living room set that they'd bought, but it wouldn't work with the TV in the bedroom. So that was a major issue, certainly in Britain. I can count the people on two hands that I know that happened to. Got a PlayStation home and found they had to put it in the living room, couldn't use it on the bedroom television. And I think that obviously kept the cost down because there's no point in having analog output. And to be fair, most people had started to phase it out, but usually only in the expensive living room telly, not in the 10-year-old telly that they had in their bedrooms at the time. And so that was an issue for some people, but not all. Anyway, so let's get on to the rest of the hardware. So you still needed memory cards. You had the 8 megabyte Sony ones, and you had various third-party ones and high capacity memory cards and things like that. Now, I had when I bought my PlayStation 2. A funny story as to how I ended up with one. I wasn't really that interested in getting one. I was quite happy with my PlayStation 1. And I didn't have a lot of money at the time. But I had gotten... my girlfriend at the time who I was living with, I had gotten her into the Final Fantasy games, and I'd played through Final Fantasy 7 and Final Fantasy 9 and got her into the Final Fantasy games, and she played through Final Fantasy 9. And she was absolutely hooked on it. So I decided that rather than get her a nice girly birthday present like a boyfriend probably should, I don't know, a meal out, flowers, whatever, I decided to get her a PlayStation 2 and Final Fantasy X, and that's how I ended up with a PlayStation 2. I had absolutely no intention of getting one until it was far cheaper than it was, but I think I paid... In total, I think I paid about £180. So it'd been out a little while by this point, and that's what I bought. So I ended up with a PlayStation 2 much earlier than I was going to buy one, purely because I could get away with buying one for the household, but as a present for somebody else. So that kind of worked out. So anyway, but when I bought that, I ended up having to buy another memory card because she wanted a memory card, so I bought the Sony one for her, and then I ended up having to buy a second one for myself. So I bought the Max Memory. I think it was a Daytel made one. It was like a Max Memory 64 megabyte or something like that. So I ended up buying one of them, which was fine at the time, but I have since found out that it doesn't work with the PlayStation 3. So if you want to transfer saves over to a PlayStation 3 using one of these third-party memory cards, it won't work. It just won't transfer the saves properly. It won't do a lot of things properly. So that's since something that I found out was an issue. But luckily, the 8 megabyte original Sony ones are cheap as chips. You can get them for about £3 or £4. They're not scarce in any way. Now, it only came with the original PlayStation only came with 2 controller ports. The original PlayStation 2 only came with 2 controller ports. And the fashion for consoles at the time, beginning with the Nintendo 64, generation previous, and then continuing on with the Xbox. Was going multiplayer. It was going 4-player, and this was before sort of wireless pads didn't really come into focus until the next generation. So they had to be wired ports. So you still had to buy a MultiTAP if you wanted to play multiplayer. Although technically you could network 2 consoles together for certain games, like you could with the original PlayStation, that did require link cables and things like that. So I don't know anyone that did that. Everyone bought a MultiTAP. But beware, there are certain designs of MultiTAP, especially the third-party ones, that will only fit in certain consoles. So i.e. if you've got a Slim, you need to have the MultiTAP Slim version. If you've got the original model, the fat model, you need to have the fat version. And as far as I'm aware, there is no MultiTAP for the Japanese PSX. It doesn't exist because it won't fit in the slots. So that doesn't exist. So if you have one of them and it works, great for you. You can't play any 4-player games. Not that there are that many, to be fair. There's a couple of football games and things like that, 4-player games. So yeah, what else? PlayStation Eye camera. Now, this was a new thing, and this was only set up for a handful of games, really, and it was. I don't really know how it came about, because I think they got their Eye camera out before Microsoft brought out. Well, obviously they got their Eye camera out before Microsoft brought out the Kinect, but I don't know where it really came from, the idea behind it. Now, the PlayStation Eye camera, they still make these now. They still make them for, obviously they make them for the PlayStation 4, the PlayStation camera V1 and V2. So this is obviously something that Sony's been going for a long time. But the first one came out for the PlayStation 2, and it works with a handful of things. Mostly sort of video creation studio stuff. Not to any degree of professional. I mean, it was all really aimed at kids. But a lot of people, this was their first. If you didn't have a PC at home and you didn't have the internet at home, which when, in 2002 in Britain, a lot of people still didn't, this was probably the first time you'd ever used a webcam. So it was just a fun little thing. And to be perfectly honest, you can pick them up for nothing now. People throw them away. I mean, literally, you go on eBay, you can probably find a job lot of about 30 of them for about 30 quid. So maybe you're paying £1 each or something like that. So yeah, the PlayStation Eye camera, a throwaway item, although interestingly you can actually use them with a PC as a normal webcam. You can still use them today with Windows 8 and Windows 10 as a normal web camera. So if you need a new web camera, obviously it's not going to be high def, but there's an avenue to look at. So probably one of the most important pieces of hardware to somebody owning a PlayStation 2 today, the network adapter. Now these things are like gold dust. You can't find them. An original PlayStation 2 Sony branded network adapter, you can't find them. But there are issues with these things even if you can find them. Now, number one issue is they only take an IDE hard disk. So you have to have an older hard disk in order to use the Sony one, which is, I presume, is how you're going to use it. Nobody's going to use it to do networking, although some people are. I'll come to that point later. But the long and the short is, you're probably not going to want the official Sony one. You're probably going to want one of the third-party Chinese ones that takes a modern SATA hard disk. Although you can actually modify the Sony ones, the cost of doing so means that you may as well have just bought the knockoff one, like the StarTech or something like that is quite popular at the moment. But what the hard disk does, and I will touch on this later on as well, because this is where the PlayStation 2 starts to become relevant to the modern world, is what the hard disk was originally designed to do was to provide extra storage for like networked games. So if you had Final Fantasy 11, say, which didn't I don't think came out on the PlayStation 2 in the UK, but did in other places. You needed the hard disk in order to play that. There was also a Linux distribution that was available for the PlayStation 2, so you could technically use it as like a sort of cut down PC. You needed a hard disk for that, and there's a few other bits and pieces that you would need a hard disk for, mostly for playing online stuff. But what it was useful for is third parties started to bring out stuff that used the hard disk in certain ways. I mean, Daytel had, I forget what theirs was called, it might have been part of the Action Replay series, where you could access the hard disk and keep downloaded save files or have it as backups to memory cards, which is fine. It's a bit overkill to do that, but that's what they did. But there was also this other thing called HD Loader, which basically let you rip games from the DVD or the CD onto the hard disk, so that you weren't burning out the laser by playing your favourite game. But what this meant is that later on, when people got faster internet connections, is that they could use that same setup to then put games they'd ripped off the internet onto the hard disk, and therefore not have to go and buy the games. Which is what I did myself when Final Fantasy XII first came out. It came out in the US about 4 months before it came out here, and I really, really wanted to play it. It's still... I think it probably is in my top few favourite Final Fantasies today. But I really wanted to play it. So I remember I had one of these HD loaders, and I downloaded the American version of Final Fantasy XII. And then I managed to upset my girlfriend at the time because I refused to leave the house on New Year's Eve because I just finished downloading Final Fantasy XII. And decided I didn't fancy going to the New Year's Eve party. I wanted to stay at home and play Final Fantasy XII, which I'd literally just downloaded that morning. So yeah, I was not talked of in the best terms that night, I imagine. But I don't care because I wasn't there. I was playing Final Fantasy XII, and we've long split up now anyway, so it's kind of irrelevant. But that's basically what people did, or what I did, and what certain other people did. And this is what brings the PlayStation 2 back into relevancy now, is the fact that you can do this, and you don't have to go and buy all the games. You can just play them from a hard disk. And what this means for consoles you buy today, the fat models I'm talking about, not the slim models, is that you can download the games you want, or if you have them on disc, rip them off the disc, and just put them on a hard disk, and you've got the whole thing sat there, ready to go. Now, you don't even necessarily need the software now, because you can buy... Because the PlayStation 2 was designed to run a distribution of Linux, you can actually get it to load other stuff from memory cards and from USB keys, which accesses the hard disk without having this software. Because if you want a copy of HD Loader today, it is probably going to set you back a small fortune for the actual disk. Or Swap Magic was the other way you could do it to access the hard disk. But so yeah, what this basically does is on the one hand it cuts down the use of the laser, because to be fair, it is a pain to try and replace components on the PlayStation 2, and the thing that always universally goes wrong with the fat model PS2s is the laser. You might find if you buy a second-hand one, it will read CDs and not DVDs, or it will read certain discs, it will read some PlayStation games, it won't read some others. Doesn't seem to be much rhyme or reason other than the laser is wearing out. So it stops that issue. But what it also does is it circumvents one of the PlayStation 2's biggest problems, and that it is quite possibly the most import-unfriendly console in history. Honestly, you basically had to go through the same means to play import games on it as you did to play pirate games. So if you had your PlayStation 2 modded in some way, or you used these discs to play import games, well, at that point you may as well pirate it because you've got all the kit to do so. What was the point in buying the expensive import game? And running games off a hard disk is what basically circumvents all that. It circumvents the region lockout, it circumvents the copy protection, and brings the PlayStation 2 screaming into 2018 we are at the moment, with a whole load of nuts and bolts under the hood that weren't really there at the time of the console's release, keeping it relevant. Now, what has made it slightly irrelevant is the fact that if you own certain models of the PlayStation 2, you can play those games anyway. You don't really have to worry so much about replacing the disc, the lasers when they wear out, because it's much easier to do on a PlayStation 3 than it is on a PlayStation 2, and the picture actually looks really quite good. It cleans up quite well for a PlayStation 3. So Sony kind of knocked that on the head anyway, but irrelevant to that, we're just talking about the PlayStation 2. And that's what a lot of people do now, is they will buy a fat model PlayStation 2, they will fit a cheap Chinese network adapter to it, usually a StarTech. They seem to be the ones that people go for. They will throw in a SATA hard drive, a modern hard drive, and they will put everything on there and then boot into it using ELF files that are on memory cards or USB sticks. So you never actually really need to touch any of the fancy software. You never need to fiddle with a network. You don't need to swap this or any of that. It actually is, if you want to play PlayStation 2 hardware, that is probably the best. PlayStation 2 software, that is probably the best way to do it. So that's all pros with the fat model. When it comes to the slim, that makes things a lot more difficult. You do need to use external hard disks for that. You need different types of software. You can still use the ELF file exploits on a slim PlayStation 2, but it's a lot harder to set up. But it very much can be done. I just advise that if you were thinking of doing that, you'd be better off buying the fat model. And just assume that any second-hand PlayStation 2 you buy is not going to read half the disk you put in it at this point, because the lasers always seem to be the first thing to go. Always the same with Sony, the lasers go. On Xboxes, it tends to be the mechanism, the drive mechanisms that actually go. On Sony products, it seems to be the lasers. They should work together and just build the ultimate CD drive. So anyway, I may have rambled on a bit too much about the hard disk, and I am going to mention it again before the end of this video. Right, so the last thing I'm basically going to say on the hardware is I'm not going to go into any third-party hardware, for the simple reason that because this is the best-selling console there's ever been, there is so much third-party hardware. I mean, honestly, if you were to go in sort of the early 2000s, sort of 2003, 2004, to any shop, I mean, literally, not even necessarily an electronics shop, like any shop, you could trip over third-party PlayStation 2 hardware and controllers and all the rest of it. So, there's just so much of it. But what this means as well is that it means you can pick up loads of hardware pretty cheap. Not all of it's still going to work. I mean, obviously, if it's a light gun, it's not going to work with a modern television. Forget it. If it's a third-party pad, the buttons might be dirty or stuck. I mean, they're not. The build quality on the third-party stuff wasn't very good. But the fact is, you can pick up you can go to any boot sale probably up and down the country and you will still pick up third-party hardware, racing wheels especially. When Gran Turismo 3 came out, loads of people went out and bought racing wheels that were all rubbish. They weren't like the £300-400 racing wheels you get now. They were cheap plastic bits of nonsense, but you can literally pick up box loads for next to nothing. So there's no point in me really going into that, because you're not, even if you end up with half of the stuff you buy doesn't work, you haven't spent anything on it really, so you may as well throw it away. What I will say is, when you're buying the actual console, because I bought a few PlayStation 2 consoles, and in fact the other week I found another PlayStation 2 console, this time a silver slim model that I didn't even know I had. It wasn't on my inventory of consoles, it was in the back of a cupboard in a carrier bag with 2 controllers and a little stack of games, so didn't even know I had it. I mean, you can literally trip over these things and they're so cheap, but most of them, like I've said a minute ago, won't read. And I'll just explain the different discs, the process I go through. Is basically, when I'm testing a PlayStation 2, I know pretty much the only thing that goes on it is the laser. So that's what I check. So for that, I have a PlayStation 2 CD game. You'll spot these because they're blue on the back. Generally. So PlayStation 2, basically the games came on 2 formats. They came on DVD and CD. A lot of them, especially the cheaper ones, still came on CD because they were cheaper to produce at the time. So that's the blue-backed ones. The silver-backed PlayStation 2 games are DVD games. So throw one of them in, check it. Check that it actually reads. Because all PlayStation 2s are backwards compatible with PlayStation 1 games, I always find it's handy to have one of them to check that reads as well. And the last 2 things I check is a music CD, see if that plays, and this is going to be a funny one. I was going to say a standard DVD, but a major tip I got off somebody years ago was Warner Brothers used to do their DVDs, like their older DVDs, in they didn't come in a plastic case. They came in like a rigid cardboard case with basically that had a plastic backing on it. So that would be like the older copies of say Batman or The Matrix or something like that. Now, here's a good tip for you. Those are the DVDs you want to test things with. Because I don't really know the reasoning behind it, but Warner Brothers at the time, specifically on them cardboard back DVDs, put some sort of funny copy protection on them, so that even some DVD players at the time, especially the cheaper ones, couldn't read them properly. They stuttered and the colours went all wrong and things like that. It was some sort of in-house copy protection they'd invented. Now, a PlayStation 2 at its full strength will be able to read that, but there's something actually on the disc that means that's the best one to test with, because if you can read that, it will read every other DVD movie you own. And I don't know why this is. Somebody gave me that tip years ago, and it actually does seem to have worked, is that I've found old DVD players that will read a lot of my DVDs, but then I got to put in Batman or The Matrix or something like that. One of these cardboard back ones, just won't touch it, won't go near it, won't even read it, read errors, all the rest of it. So they are, so that was a tip I was given years ago, and it actually does work. So when you're testing one of these consoles, you need to have 5 discs with you, basically, to test it properly. And I guarantee that every single one you buy won't read all 5 of the discs, not these days, because the lasers just wear out. Even mine that I bought years ago, and I've looked after it quite well, that doesn't read certain discs. It has real problems reading DVDs and things like that. It does read PS1 games perfectly, but for some reason you put a music CD in and it skips all over the place. So I don't know what that issue is, because CDs are CDs technically, but technically not. Anyway, so that's my last bit on the hardware. I think I am going to come back to it briefly towards the end. But yeah, for the moment, that's going to be the last bit. Let's get on to the games. Now, again, if you think to modernise a console like the Wii is always the one people cite for just being absolutely full of shovelware. The PlayStation 2 library is absolutely full of shovelware. I mean, honestly, these games, some of them are even worthless. You wouldn't even buy them. You'd throw them on a skip. There's something, depending on who you ask and which websites you go to, the top line seems to be around about 3,400 games. And in some cases more than that, but that seems to be about the average that everyone decides was ever released for the PlayStation 2 in all territories. Now, in your territory, in Europe, that seems to be about 2,800-ish. In the US, I don't know. But it seems they got more games than anyone else, so likelihood is more shovelware. And absolutely, half of that library is just shovelware. It is nonsense games that are not going to be worth anything to anyone. So, the one thing I'm going to say that I've mentioned briefly, and I will say again, if you are playing games from the disc, anything imported should be avoided at all costs, unless you have a hard disk solution or some other way of playing the game. Avoid it, because you're going to have to modify the console in order to play it directly from the disc anyway. And like I said a minute ago, the same solutions you would go through to playing an import disc, you may as well stick it on a hard disk at that point, because you're going to have to do pretty much the same stuff. There is swap magic and things like that will play import discs, but you normally have to modify your console in order to use it. So, aside from that, of the entire library of games, for collection purposes, you're probably going to get somewhere between 10 and 20 games from the whole library that are going to run you over £100. And they are the Grails of PlayStation 2 collecting. That's things like Rule of Rose is a big one that people go for, which is like a horror game. It's not actually a massive game. It doesn't take an awful long time. I'd say it's kind of overinflated at this point, but that's one of them. And there's a few others that are going to run you silly money. Then the next sort of 150 to 200, maybe 300 odd games are going to run you somewhere between that between £10 and that £100. And these are probably the vast majority of good stuff that you want in the collection. The reason why some of these have remained, so basically that first sort of 10 or 20 games that are going to run you a lot of money doesn't mean they're good games, it means they're rare games, and they are the genuine rarities. You know, the stuff that was in limited releases or had a recalled release, or, you know, a cover art with swearing on it or something like that. They are the stuff that's genuinely rare, not necessarily good. The next 200 to 300 games that are going to run you somewhere between a tenner and £100 are because they're good. They are genuinely good games, and that's the stuff that people didn't get rid of. That's the stuff that people didn't throw away. So that's basically, there's less on the market than what people want. Basically, that's the sort of stuff you really want to be going for. Some of them is because they're rare, but for the vast majority of that sort of grouping, that's what you want. The entire rest of the library after that, so somewhere around about 3,000 odd games that were released for the console, are going to run you under a tenner. The majority of them are going to be under £3. Now, that doesn't mean they're all bad, but I'd say probably 80% of that crop is stuff you're never going to play and don't want. And I mean, but bearing in mind, in that glut of games, you've got stuff like GTA Vice City, not San Andreas anymore because the price has gone up slightly on that. Final Fantasy X, Final Fantasy 12, Gran Turismo 3 and 4, they're all going to be under a tenner. If you are into your football games, fantastic, there's going to be loads of them. Sports games, there's loads of them on this system, and if you're into that, then you'll be able to find loads of stuff really cheap that you do want to play. The vast majority of us aren't that bothered. But bearing in mind that if this is a market, if this is a collection that you're going for, you really, really are going to have to know your stuff, because otherwise you're going to buy box loads of crap that you're just going to end up having to offload for probably less than you paid for it because nobody wants it. So do bear in mind that you can have the world's biggest PlayStation 2 collection, you can have all the games eventually. 90% of them aren't going to be worth the disc they're on. Alright, maybe 80%, but the vast majority of that collection, if you had a full set, is going to be worthless tut that nobody wants, and you're not even going to play. So this is one, because the amount of games is so massive, you're really, really going to have to do your homework if you want to collect for this system. And that is unfortunate because there is loads of good stuff that gets overlooked because the cover art is bad, or you know, the screenshots are a bit dodgy, or maybe it came from a cheaper publishing house or stuff like that. So there is stuff that's going to be overlooked. So you do need to do your homework with this console. Is the only proviso on sort of collecting for it. Now, I collect for it, and I do tend to research what I'm doing quite a lot of the time, but I have bought loads of stuff in job lots where there is no way that I would be able to get rid of the stuff that I don't need. I mean, literally, I'm probably sitting on at least 20 to 40 games that I will never be able to resell because they're worth pennies. There's not any point in going to the effort to resell them. Even stuff that is genuinely good, like Grand Theft Auto Vice City, you'll never sell it. You'll never sell it to anyone because everyone that has a PlayStation 2 already has it. Everyone that had a PlayStation 2 then already has it. I'm pretty sure there are more copies of Grand Theft Auto Vice City on the market today than there are PlayStation 2s that still work. I would be certain of it almost. Anyway, I did think about when I was doing this, actually pinpointing sort of 30 odd games that you should probably start with if you were going to collect for this console. But then that would turn me into like a sort of hidden gems video, and I don't really want to do that because I think it's probably one of the most overused phrases in YouTube game collecting is hidden gems, and every single one I look at games that, you know, it's like, hidden gems. Mario Sunshine. Well, how is that a hidden gem? Do you know what I mean? I'm just going to reel off the heavy hitters more than likely, and anything. So I'm not going to do that. I'm not even going to list the games because, like I say, there are so many in this particular collection. It would be absolutely pointless me reeling off 30. It would be pretty pointless me reeling off 100 at this point because you're talking minute percentages of how many there actually are. It's just not worth doing. Anyway, what I will say about the games is be wary because prices on PlayStation 2 games fluctuate constantly. Something that you pay £8 or £9 for today, you may go and look at in a week or 2 weeks' time, and it's done £1. It's the there is no fixed price on a lot of the smaller games in this collecting market. There is doesn't seem to be any real fixed price. It all depends on how many are available at any given time. Now, the best place to look obviously is eBay to see what the market's doing and look at eBay auctions rather than buy it nows. But even then, you will find wild fluctuations on what things actually went for. And I don't really know why that is. It does seem to, for instance, when stuff gets re-released on newer systems, for instance, when Final Fantasy X got a re-release on the PlayStation 3 and PlayStation 4, probably about 4 years ago now, wasn't it? It was quite a while ago. You would expect the PlayStation 2 versions to go down in price. Well, they didn't. They went up. And I don't know what contributes to that, and I mean, just because I happen to be checking these things out, the Final Fantasy 12 got re-released on the PlayStation 4 about a year and a bit ago, just over a year ago, I think, at this point, and which was based on the international Zodiac job system that had come out in Japan. Now, if you were to go and look on eBay 6 months before that game was announced, you could pick up International Zodiac Job System on the PlayStation 2 for about £12-15 plus your shipping from Japan on top. So you're probably talking about 20 quid, give or take. If you go and look at that now, it's vastly more. And I don't really know why, because you'd think, when the new version comes out, surely that devalues the old version. But it doesn't seem to do that with PlayStation 2 games for some reason. The prices seem to... But anyway, the point I'm making is the prices fluctuate all the time on PlayStation 2 stuff. So... Again, this is another point, like I said earlier, you really have to know what you're doing in this market if you're collecting PlayStation 2 games. I have found pretty much the safest way is to go after stuff that you've heard of and don't go after stuff that you haven't heard of. But, that being said, you know, go and hear of more things. Do your research and like I say with all these videos, go and do your research into what you actually want to play. Try and steer clear of videos called hidden gems, because in my experience I've found that they're not. They're very much at the forefront gems, because again it is difficult to do because the game library is so massive. So the last thing I want to say that again brings the PlayStation 2 back to relevancy these days is that I just want to touch on modding and online play. Now, modding, first of all, I've already mentioned bits of it, you know, adding hard disks and things like that. One of the best things you can do for your modern PlayStation 2 is a program called FreeMcBoot. And there are two ways you can get this for your PlayStation 2. Either you own a copy of Dato Action Replay Max, which I do, and there's another way using Swap Magic in order to get this on your PlayStation 2. But I have found by far the easiest way to get FreeMcBoot on a PlayStation 2 is to just go on eBay or anywhere else and buy a memory card that already has it on. Because generally there's only about £1 or £2 premium over buying an actual memory card. So, you know, it's going to cost you an extra £2, whereas if you had to buy the hardware to put it on yourself, it's going to cost you quite a lot of money. But what you can do with FreeMcBoot is you can do this thing like I mentioned earlier, where you can load up ELF files, and lots of them do different things. So you can play with the graphics settings, you can play with the outputs, you can put cheat codes and things like that on if you wanted to. But more to the point, you can play stuff from a hard disk without actually needing any disks in the drive at all, just the hard disk and the network adapter. Which, if there was one thing I suggest you do if you're buying a PlayStation 2 now, is go and buy a memory card with FreeMcBoot on it. unless the bundle you're presumably buying it with has all the stuff that you can do it yourself. Go and buy a memory card with FreeMint boot on it, and at some point in the future, I keep intending on doing a video that concisely shows how to use all the different features of these programs. I've still never got round to doing it, purely because there's bits of hardware that I can't find at the moment, and I'm not sure where they are, and that's why I haven't got round to doing it. They may be because I've got stuff scattered around in different places. I don't have everything here. Because space is at a premium, and I have to borrow space from other people. So stuff is elsewhere quite often when I need it to be here. The other thing I just wanted to touch on is online play. Now, online play is not something I'm into. And if you're into it, yeah, fantastic. What I wanted to touch on basically is that all the online servers for PlayStation 2 games, or the few online games that there were, are closed. They're gone. Or at least the official ones. Because Sony and Microsoft did their... obviously, Microsoft Xbox, the original Xbox, OG Xbox, not Xbox One, OG Xbox, had an online storefront. And you could use that to play your online games. The way Microsoft did it was by using their own servers in order to then connect to other servers elsewhere. The way Sony did it was quite different, was you didn't actually need to use Sony for anything other than to verify that your console was a genuine PlayStation 2. I forget what the system was that they called this, but what it would basically do, your PlayStation 2 would send a ping off to a server at Sony. Sony would then send a packet back, and then the reply would be, this person has a original model PlayStation 2 with no modifications, using an official Sony network adapter. The hard disk looks fine, doesn't have any games on it. This is the hardware they're using, such a thing. And that would basically go off to the Sony server and then send a code back to the PlayStation 2 that verified that that was okay and you were using the correct hardware that Sony wanted you to use. And then it would ping off to the server that was connected to whichever game you were using. So what that basically means today is, I probably haven't explained that very well, but the way it basically means is all you actually need to do to play an online game on the PlayStation 2 technically is to bypass that Sony verification. Now, that's the servers that have all been turned off. But provided you can bypass that verification, you should be... Technically, there is no reason why somebody can't set up their own server for a specific game now, because they were game-specific servers. They didn't all go through... none of them went through Sony. They were all game-specific. So what that means is, technically, provided you can circumvent that initial check, and the PlayStation 2 says, yep, that's okay, go ahead... there's nothing to stop somebody setting up a server now for any PlayStation 2 game they want, provided they've got the software to do so. So what this means is that there is an online community starting to come back to the PlayStation 2, because if you know the address, the address of the server that you actually want to connect to play whichever game it is you want to use, you don't actually need that verification. That verification was only to let your PlayStation 2 go off and find the server. But provided you know where that server is, you don't need the verification in order to do that, and you can completely bypass it. So what has actually been happening recently is that people have been setting up their own servers for things. Now, the biggest one, as far as I'm aware, and like I say, online gaming is not my thing, is SOCOM 2. And by biggest, I mean there's 1 or 2 servers been set up, and there's, a couple of 100 daily players, which isn't a lot to modernise. But bearing in mind that you're talking about a game that is getting on for what now, 17, 18 years old, No, maybe not that old, but let's say 15 conservatively years old. That's not bad to have a couple of hundred daily players. And this is on third-party servers that are run by who knows who. They're not even run by the original companies. So if you were to go online and you were to Google my favourite Sony PS2 online game, there may well be somebody running a server for it, and provided they've put up the IP address of that particular server and all the information to get in, you can actually manually enter that on your PlayStation 2 and go and play that online game. There's nothing stopping you, and which you can't do with an Xbox. And this is the point, is the Xbox may have won online gaming in this generation. I mean, there's no question it did. It absolutely won online gaming in this generation. But you can't use it now. PlayStation 2, thanks to some really, really clever techie people that are massive fans of whichever particular game, you still can. Technically, there is no reason why you can't. It's just a question of somebody actually setting up a server for your specific game. And this is sort of one of the things that it just makes me pleased. You know, I have no interest in online gaming. Never have, never will. Absolutely refuse to do it. But it does warm my heart a little bit that people are still doing this, and people are going miles and miles out of their way to figure all this stuff out in order to make freely available. Let's not forget, these people are, you know, not just taking time out of their day, but money out of their pocket with electricity costs and server costs and things, to actually run servers for these games. And I think there's something just kind of magical about that. I mean, comment by all means if you disagree with me, or even if you want to, if you have one of these servers and you see this video, put a link in, put a thing in the comments. You know, just why not? You know, I have a SOCOM online server for the PlayStation 2. The IP is blah blah blah. Put that in there, because somebody somewhere will one day see this video and go, "That is a brilliant idea. I'm going to try that out." Not me, but you know, somebody else. Now, so I've talked about all that, and usually at this point I would do a bit of summing up, but I'm just going to mention another thing just tacked on the end of this, and that is casual gaming. Now, for me, one of the biggest things in the PlayStation 2 library, or certainly one of the biggest sellers at the time, and in fact still sell well now. Now, this is another thing that the Wii was accused of when it came out, but actually started with the PlayStation 2, and this is the rise of casual gaming. People that had never played games before really were starting to get into gaming, probably because they were one of these families that bought a PlayStation 2 to go in the living room rather than the bedroom because it was a DVD player, and then found out it could do this other stuff. Now, specifically, I'm talking about the karaoke games, so like SingStar and the like, and the buzz games. Now, a lot of people associate them more closely with the PlayStation 3, but they actually started here on the PlayStation 2. And this, for me, was the beginning of casual gaming. Now, all of these things are worthless today. You can pick up the buzz remotes and the games for next to nothing. You can pick up the wired microphones, because it was wired microphones with the PlayStation 2. So you had a trail of wires across the living room, and a couple of the SingStar games. They may not even have been called, I think they might have been called SingStar then, but for next to nothing. But if you're having a party, and especially if non-gamers are going to be there, so like you're having a party at your house or somewhere else, and even if non-gamers are going to be there, and especially if women are going to be there, stick on a SingStar game, stick on a buzz game, you will have people crowding round that screen all night long. And this is where it started. This is where the booming casual games started, was right here with this console. And if you've got a family of like younger kids and things like that, stick them in front of a buzz game. Especially the ones that are aimed at kids, like the buzz games with the easy questions and the jump in the frog things and throwing custard pies. Stick them in front of one of them. You won't hear a cheep out of them all weekend. They don't care about graphical fidelity. They care more about using buzzers to play games than they do a complicated looking controller. Young kids especially. You stick a 5-year-old in front of one of the kiddie orientated buzz games or a SingStar microphone, you'll have them hooked in, you won't hear from them all weekend. They're brilliant things. But this is basically where it started, and I could have mentioned that earlier on, but I thought this was a good way to sort of round it off, was just to say there's all this stuff here that interests gamers, but then there's all this stuff sort of tacked on at the bottom that sort of affects everyone. I mean, honestly, I don't know anyone that, when faced with a buzz game, won't play it. There's nobody that will sit in the corner with their arms folded and go, "Oh no, I don't like games." Everyone, your gran will play buzz. It's a quiz game. Old people like quizzes. Your gran will play it. Your 5-year-old will play it. And this is where it started, was the casual gaming boom. The Wii is often credited with it. This is where it began. This is the genesis of that sort of thing on a mainstream console. That's the kind of bit. Anyway, so now I'm going to do the summing up. So what do I think? Do I think you collect? Do you emulate? Do you avoid? As usual with these videos, it's never going to be avoid. It might be one day, but at the moment, it's never going to be avoid. Now, do you emulate? Absolutely, if you can. You need a reasonably powered PC in order to do it. It's possible you can emulate PS2 stuff on other things that aren't PCs, but certainly you won't be able to emulate it on something as low powered as a Raspberry Pi or a smartphone or something like that. You need a full-size PC and a reasonably gutsy one in order to do it. So yes, with the proviso that you've got a reasonably gutsy PC. So that leaves us with the third option, which is collect. And again, the answer is yes, but it comes with provisos, some of which I'll mention, some of which I'll reel off. With regards to hardware, test it when you first get it, because I'm telling you now, the first thing to go is the lasers. If you do happen to come across one of these Japanese PSX models, if you want something to look nice on your shelf, then by all means buy it. You'll spend a lot of money, but do buy it. But if you're looking to actually play PlayStation 2 games, I would give it a miss. For the simple reason that there's hardware in there that you're paying for that you're not even going to need, like an analog TV tuner. They don't even work anymore. A DVR, which is fine, but the hard disk probably doesn't work. And the hard disks are locked to the consoles in them. So you'll never be able to replace it, so you can't use a DVR, even if you could get an analog signal through it these days, which you can't because everything's gone to digital TV. So I would advise always test it, even the slim models. Now the slim models, the lasers tend to fare a bit better, and due to the fact that they have an external power brick rather than an internal transformer, they don't suffer from any heat related issues as far as I'm aware, but I would still advise buying the original one purely for the fact that you're probably going to need to put games on a hard disk, and therefore you're probably going to want the original model, because trying to mess about with USB bootloader and things like that to try and boot things from a USB hard disk is slightly less straightforward than it is just using a fat PS2. Also, the fat ones tend to be cheaper. I don't know why, because you'd think that's the opposite of what that sounds. And maybe if more people say you should buy that model, maybe they will end up being more expensive. But for now, they tend to be cheaper. And I don't know what the rhyme and reason for that is. Obviously, Like I say, even if you're going to collect the actual discs, I would still advise probably putting a hard disk there and FreeMcBoot or some way to play games off the hard disk. Because, like I say, if you have to replace the laser in one of these things, you're going to spend a day doing it. It is really kind of shoehorned in there. So test it, the method I said, the 5-disc method. And as for collecting the games, do bear in mind what I said earlier on, provided you watch that bit. The vast majority of this library is going to be shovelware nonsense that you're not going to want to play, and you're probably not going to want to keep around. It's going to take up much more space than it's worth. Although they don't really take up any more space than DVDs do. So they don't. I mean, the boxes don't take a massive amount of space up. But if you're going to start collecting hardware for this thing, and you're going to go after third-party hardware, then bearing in mind you are going to need a lot of space because there is a lot of it. I would probably advise against investing in loads of controllers and a MultiTAP, because by and large, you're not going to play that many. There aren't that many 4 or 5 player games in if you take the library as a whole. There's not that many. It's a good thing to have on occasion, especially if you like football games, because you can get 4 or 5 people joining in. But if you're not going to do that, I wouldn't bother. Now, the controllers are cheap as chips, and also you can use PlayStation 1 controllers, the DualShock PlayStation 1 controllers. You can use them. Because it's basically exactly the same controller. So if you are going to use a MultiTAP, then go for whichever's cheaper. If PlayStation 1's controllers are cheaper that week, use them. But like I say, collecting also comes with this little proviso that I threw sort of at the end there. Whereas if you've got young kids or old people in the family that often come round, do make a point of collecting some of the more casual games, especially if you want a multiplayer experience. In my opinion, having played a lot of these games, especially with kids because they love them, the buzz game, you're probably better off investing in a buzz game and a set of buzzers than you are investing in a MultiTAP. Like I say, it depends what you're playing. But that's what you probably want to do if you're after the multiplayer experience. You'll get more mileage, especially if you've got a young family. You'll get more mileage out of the buzz games than you will buying 5 controllers to play FIFA 12 or whatever. I mean, that's just the way it's going to be. You're going to get more mileage out of the buzz. And yeah, that's basically it. Collect. I think that's going to be my verdict, in fact. It absolutely is going to be collect, but with the proviso that you're going to have to do your homework and you're going to have to tailor to your collection to your specific circumstances. I would never, ever in a million years advise anyone goes after a full PlayStation 2 collection. There will be some people that do. I'm telling you now, you're going to go to so much effort for so little reward trying to complete a collection of PlayStation 2 games, and you are going to lose so much space. I mean, you imagine, you take one DVD case and just go to the corner of your room and put it on a skirting board. Now imagine that 3,500 times, going across and up and, filling your shelves basically. How many extra shelves are you going to have to put in your house to fit 3,500 games? Or possibly only, if you're collecting for a single region, maybe only 2,800 games. That's an awful lot of shelf space, and an awful lot of space and time and effort you're going to have to put into getting a full collection. So no way in a million years would I advise anyone to do it. So that's basically the proviso. Absolutely collect for this console, but test every piece of hardware you get. And which is a good idea anyway, to be fair. But the lasers on these things are really prone to failure. I don't think I've got a single PlayStation 2 console at the moment that reads every disc I put in it. So I mean that's just a fact, and I've looked after mine. So if you buy one second hand off the boot sale that's maybe been sat out in somebody's garage for 10 years. yeah, just be advised that it's probably not going to read anything. So yeah, absolutely. But like I say, really, really, really do your homework before you enter into a PlayStation 2 collection. So that's that sort of summed up. Like I say, now this video has probably already been over an hour. In fact, I know it's already been over an hour. And had I left in all the stuff that I was writing about that was originally going to be in this video, like I say, I like to add in things about how to get the best out of the consoles these days. And one of the issues the PlayStation 2 has, I'll just explain briefly at the end here, is that it looks really, really dodgy on a modern television. I mean, really, it does not. It is probably has a worse picture than an N64, and I know the comment section is going to be screaming about this. But for some reason, and it may just be my television, but I've tried it on a few. I've tried it on other people's televisions, like when they've got a PlayStation 2, and it just doesn't look right. It doesn't clean up very well. There's just mess. And there's no easy solution to this, unfortunately. Now, this is something that I was going to go into on this video, which I think is actually going to be better suited to doing a full video on its own on just how to clean up the picture and signal from, in particular, this generation of consoles. So that's things like basically just the Xbox and the PlayStation 2, because that's the ones that they're sort of on that cusp of when people started to buy HD style televisions, but they weren't quite. If you get what I mean, they were consoles that were released when everyone had a big old fat television. But by the end of their life, people had started to get flatter screens. This is why, the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox were basically high-definition consoles. But these ones are kind of in the middle, and they don't really fit into any camp quite nicely. Because, as I already said at the beginning of this video, lots of people, when the PlayStation 2 first came out, fell foul of the fact that they were still using coaxial cable to connect up their consoles previous to this. So if you had a PlayStation 1, quite often you were still using it through the aerial terminals on the back, using a coaxial to actually watch it, to play it rather. So a lot of people fell foul of that. And this is part of the issue that these consoles have now. So I'm going to shut up about it now, and I'm just going to say that at some point in the future I'm going to do a dedicated video to get the best image out of both the PlayStation 2 and the original Xbox, because I think that's something I haven't quite touched on before, and I've had to learn the hard way, and it hasn't cost me a lot of money, but it's meant I've had to buy specific things in order to do it. So that's all I'll say on that. So we've ended the video. Collect and emulate if you can, collect but know what you're doing, do your homework, and really, really know what you're buying before you do, and test everything, and that's probably the end. So that actually rounds off this entire generation. Now, the next video in this series probably won't take me as long to do, because there's far less complication involved. So let me have a think what the next video will be. It will be 7th generation, obviously. No, I haven't decided whether I'm going to do the Wii, the 360, or the PlayStation 3. Likelihood is I'm going to do the Xbox 360. No, I am toying with the... No, I haven't done any sort of handhelds as I've been doing these. But, and this is going to be a big but, I am seriously considering, when it comes to the 7th generation, I think that's probably at the point where handhelds are worth covering. So I'm going to have a serious think about what videos I do, first of all, and what order they're going to come in. So I'm not going to set that in stone now. I'm just going to say that I am having to think about how I'm actually going to do these videos from now on, especially as we get to modern times, because once I finish the 7th generation, I can't really do the 8th generation, because the only 8th generation console that's come to the end of its life is the Wii U. And I've already done a massive video on that, so I don't really know. I think the 7th generation may cap it off, and the way I might do that is to bring a couple of different things into the mix, maybe a handheld or two, I'm not sure. But I don't just want to do as a swan song the same sort of video I've been doing all the time. So I'm going to go away and have a think about that, and I hope you stay tuned for when that actually happens. Hopefully it won't take me as long to do. There is other stuff going up surrounding this video, which is like walkthrough stuff that I'm doing, so I hope you click on that as well. And as usual, at the end of these videos, I'm going to say if you liked it, give it a like. If you want to subscribe, then please do. Well, it doesn't really help me out anymore. I mean, it does grow the channel, but I'm now at the point where I'm not getting monetized for anything that I do, because I'm below the threshold. So one subscriber doesn't help me out. But hey, if you don't want to subscribe, tell a friend that maybe does. Keep your eyes open for new content, and again, the comments section is for you, but as I've said before, and for some reason have to keep saying, if your comments have got nothing to add to the discussion and they're just rude, right? So if you're adding nothing to the discussion and you're just rude, your comment will be deleted. So if you put a comment up and then 10 minutes later it's gone, right? That's because you added nothing. You added nothing to the discussion other than just outright criticism. Outright criticism of the way I choose to do a video isn't adding anything to any discussion. If you've got something to actually add to a discussion on PlayStation 2, maybe something that I've missed and somebody else watching this might find interesting or might actually change their view on the console, fair enough. But if you're just going to write abuse, don't bother, because I'm going to delete it. And bearing in mind that, you know, at most a few hundred people might see this, it's going to be deleted before the vast majority of people who watch this video are actually going to read it. So you're wasting your time, you're wasting my time, you're wasting everyone's time. And I'm pretty sure it is the same sort of 2,000 odd people that go to every video on YouTube and leave the same comments. And I know which ones of you are racist. I know which ones of you have got nothing to say. You know, I know which ones of you are basically talking out the whole time, right? Because it's the same, every gaming video I see, it's the same couple of hundred names that turn up with all the snarky comments to everyone. We know who you are. We know who you are, and we will block you. So yeah, other than that, comment section, Twitter, you know the routine by now. There's going to be some stuff popped up here that actually shows other videos I've done. Maybe they're relevant to you, maybe they're not. There's a subscribe button that's popped up somewhere around here. I have been the Pickled Onion Knight, and I will see you in another video. I hope you tune into it.